Hello there. Here I am, over here. You ate all of your dinner, and you've been good today? Oh, wonderful. Now you climb right up into bed. Good. Now let me see. Oh, I know a wonderful, wonderful story. Once upon a time, in the beautiful forest, there was a lovely little cottage, and a fine forest family lived in it. There was Papa Bear. Did you hear that? He said, "Hello, I am Papa Bear." Say it again, Papa Bear. Then there was Mama Bear and Baby Bear. They were all very happy together. One day, they all sat down to dinner. Now listen carefully, and I'll translate what they say. "My porridge is too hot," said Papa. "My porridge is too cold," said Mama. "My porridge is just right," said the baby. But Papa Bear told Mama Bear to put the porridge back in the kettle, which she did. Then she served it up again in Papa's big bowl, in her medium-sized bowl, and in the baby's little bowl. And then they all went out to take a walk and let the porridge cool. Now, wandering through the forest was a little girl who was lost in the woods. She had rosy pink skin and pretty blue eyes and golden yellow hair, and that is why everyone called her Goldilocks. Poor Goldilocks. She was cold and tired and hungry. But then, as luck would have it, she came upon the little cottage. She went in, and when she saw the open door and the warm fire in the hearth, she thought, "Oh, look here, 3 bowls of porridge, and I am so hungry." So she tasted the big bowl, but it was too hot. Then she tasted the middle bowl, and it was too cold. Then she tasted the little bowl, and it was just right. So she ate it all up. Goldilocks was so tired. The other end of the room were 3 beds. So she climbed in the first bed. Oh, but it was too hard. She climbed in the second bed. Oh, it was too soft. She climbed in the third bed, and it was just right. And so she fell fast asleep. Soon the bear family was coming home. They all sat down at the table when suddenly Papa said, "Someone's been eating my porridge." Said Mama Bear. Said Baby Bear. And it's all gone. Suddenly, they looked toward the beds. "Someone's been sleeping in my bed," said Papa Bear. Said Mama Bear. Said Baby Bear. And she's still there. Baby Bear made so much noise that he woke up little Goldilocks. When she saw the 3 bears, my goodness, was she scared. Goldilocks jumped up and ran and ran. She ran so fast and she ran so hard that without thinking she found her way right out of the forest and back to her own house. My, she thought, if it weren't for those bears, I would never have found my way home. And do you know what Papa Bear said? He said,
I don't know why she was so scared. I was going to ask her to stay to dinner.
wash and clean and sew and scrub and run and rub-a-dub-dub. Ugh. That's about all poor Cinderella ever did. Now, Cinderella lived with her stepmother and her two ugly stepsisters, and they were so mean to poor Cinderella. Do you know why she got that name? You see, her real name was Ella Sue, but because she always had to clean the ashes and cinders from the fireplace, and they kept her so very busy that she always had a little soot on her face and rags for clothes, well, they called her Cinder-Ella. Now, one day, a proclamation was made by the king.
There was going to be a grand ball, and all the young girls in the kingdom were invited.
For the king, you see, hoped to find a bride for the prince. Well, the ugly stepsisters started planning what they were going to wear. And of course, Ella did all the ironing and sewing and cleaning and cooking. Well, finally the big day came, and Cinderella saw them all off to the ball. And then she sat down by the fire, and she cried and cried. Well, right out of the fire stepped a sweet little old lady, and she said, "Now don't cry, Cinderella. You too can go to the ball." Oh, Cinderella was amazed. But she was good and kind, and she didn't want to hurt the little old lady's feelings, so she didn't say anything. "Now go into the garden and bring me a pumpkin," said the old lady. Well, Cinderella brought her the pumpkin. The fairy godmother waved her magic wand, and before you could say your ABCs, the pumpkin had turned into the most beautiful golden coach you ever saw. "Oh, bring me the mouse trap from the pantry," the fairy godmother said. Well, Cinderella got it right away, for now she believed this little lady was really, truly magic. The fairy godmother waved her magic wand, and before you could say 1, 2, 3, the mice were turned into 6 prancing white horses. Well, Cinderella brought her the rat from the trap, and he became a fine, fat coachman. "You're going to need footmen," the godmother said. "Go into the garden, and you will find 6 lizards by the well." Well, Cinderella brought her the lizards. Well, the fairy godmother waved her magic wand, and before you could blink your eyes, there were 6 footmen in green and gold livery. "Now it's your turn," said the fairy godmother, and with a wave of her wand, the fairy godmother turned her rags into satin, her safety pins into diamonds and rubies, her bandana into a pearl tiara, and her bare feet were covered with the prettiest glass slippers you ever saw. "Now go and enjoy yourself," said the fairy godmother, "but you must leave before midnight, for the footmen will change back to lizards, coachmen and the rats will turn right back into rats and mice. Oh, and the coach, you won't believe that coach. It'll be just an old pumpkin again. Now, as for you, my dear, well, you will just be a cinder wench again instead of a princess." Well, Cinderella promised to remember, and off she went to the ball. Cinderella had never imagined that the palace could be that beautiful. And the prince had never imagined that a girl could be so beautiful. Why, he danced every single dance with Cinderella, and no one could tear them apart. Well, the king was delighted, for at last he felt that they had indeed found a match for his son. It was so glorious. Cinderella did not hear the clock. Then she looked up. Could it be? Was the little hand and the big hand really on top of each other? Could it truly be midnight? Oh, there was no time to lose, so she began to run. The prince chased after her, but she was too quick. In her haste, she lost one of the glass slippers. She leaped into the coach, and off they went home. And not a moment too soon. For truly, the coach and footman and the horses and the coachman vanished. And in their place were mice, lizards, a pumpkin, and a rat. The next morning, Cinderella asked her stepsisters if they'd enjoyed the ball. "Oh, what music," they said. "What food, and oh, how handsome the prince was." But that's not all. A princess appeared, and the prince fell madly in love with her. "Who was she?" asked Cinderella. "No one knows," said the other stepsister, "but they say that the prince would give half his kingdom to find her again." Cinderella was so happy, for she had fallen in love with the prince too. But then she was very sad, for she knew that she would never see him again. Oh, he would never have anything to do with a sooty kitchen maid.
The king proclaimed that the sad prince could not find his beautiful princess, and so he had agreed to marry the girl who could fit into the glass slipper.
My goodness, everybody was so excited. Even the ugly stepsisters thought that perhaps they had a chance too. Well, first of all, the princesses, then all of the duchesses in the kingdom, and then the ladies of the court, all tried to squeeze their feet into the slipper. But it was too tiny for them to get their big feet in. Then all of the daughters of the wealthy were given a chance. But none of them were able to fit into the tiny slipper either. One day, there came a knock on the door of Cinderella's house. The two stepsisters ran to the door, and there it was, the slipper. They tried to force their feet into the slipper, but it was far too small. Oh, the prince looked very sad. You see, by this time, he had tried every girl in the kingdom. There just weren't any left. "May I try?" asked Cinderella. Well, those stepsisters, they roared with laughter, but the prince looked at the frail little kitchen maid and, feeling sorry for her, said, "Of course." And of course, the slipper fit. Well, the sisters were amazed, and the prince could not believe his eyes. Suddenly, the fairy godmother appeared. She waved her wand, and Cinderella became the princess at the ball, even more beautifully dressed than before. The ugly stepsisters and the evil stepmother fell to their knees, begging Cinderella to forgive them for being so mean and so cruel to her. When the prince realized he had found his beautiful princess, he asked her to marry him, and they all lived happily ever after. Once upon a time, there was a miller who left everything he had to his 3 sons. The eldest received the mill. The second son inherited the donkey. But the youngest son got only the cat. The boy thought, "My brothers can share the mill and the donkey and live very well. But what can I do with a cat? He's not even good to eat." To the boy's surprise, the cat spoke to him. "Do not fret, my master. Just give me a bag and a pair of boots, and you will see what I can do." Well, since the cat could talk, the boy thought, perhaps he could do other amazing things. So he gave him a pair of stout boots and a game bag. So Puss in Boots went into a briar patch where the rabbits lived. He put bait in the bag and laid down and played dead. Soon a fat young rabbit took the bait, and Puss in Boots jumped up and caught him and immediately went to the castle and presented it to His Majesty the King. Puss in Boots said, "Sire, I bring a rabbit from my noble lord, the Marquis of Marbas, with his compliments."
"Tell your master we are pleased," said the king.
Then Puss in Boots hid in the cornfields and snared some partridges. Then he went to the castle and presented them to the king. The king thanked him and presented him with a bag of gold. In this way, for many months, he kept the miller's son from starving. Then one day, Puss in Boots heard that the king and his beautiful daughter would be driving near the river. So he told the miller's son to go to the river and bathe at a spot where the river runs closest to the road. Well, the boy thought it was a silly thing to do. But Puss in Boots had brought him a purse of gold, so he decided to do it. The miller's son was bathing in the river when the king's coach passed by. Suddenly, Puss in Boots jumped onto the road, shouting, "Help! Help! My lord the Marquis of Marbas is drowning!" The king ordered his guards to help the drowning Marquis. All the while, Puss in Boots shouted, "Stop, thief! Stop, thief!" And he told the king how robbers had stolen his master's coach and clothes. Well, the king sent for one of his finest suits to cover the poor Marquis's body. In the king's clothes, the miller's son really looked like a marquis, and the princess fell madly in love with him. Puss in Boots decided to carry the plot even further. So as his master got into the coach with the king and the princess, Puss ran ahead. When he came to some farmers in a meadow, he said, "If you don't tell the king that this land belongs to the Marquis of Marbas, it will go badly for you." When His Majesty drove by, the farmers shouted,
"To the great Marquis of Marbas!"
Then Puss in Boots ran on to a cornfield and shouted, "If you do not say this corn belongs to the Marquis of Marbas, you will be ground to mincemeat." Of course, he was only joking, but they were so frightened that when the king drove by, they shouted,
"To the great Marquis of Marbas!"
The king was amazed at the Marquis's estates, and the miller's son was even more amazed. Puss in Boots ran on ahead to the house of a rich ogre who really owned all the lands. He said to the ogre, "Tell me, is it true you can change yourself into anything? A lion, perhaps?"
"Of course," said the ogre. "Look!"
And the ogre turned into a lion right before his eyes. Puss in Boots leaped onto the roof to keep from being eaten. When the lion had turned back into the ogre, Puss in Boots said, "Is it true that you can also make yourself into a tiny thing, like a mouse?"
"Simple,"
boasted the ogre, and suddenly he had turned into a mouse. And before the ogre could move a muscle, Puss in Boots pounced on him and ate the mouse right up. Puss ran out onto the steps of the castle and shouted, "Welcome to the castle of my lord, the Marquis of Marbas." Well, the king thought,
"My, what a wonderful match for my daughter."
And the princess thought, "How lucky the man I love is so handsome and rich." The miller's son thought, "My goodness, he is a clever cat." And Puss, why, when the princess and the miller's son were married, he became the royal cat. And they all lived happily ever ever after. There was once a sweet little girl who was loved by all, and she certainly loved them too. Her grandmother made her a little red-hooded cape, and the little girl liked it so much she wore it everywhere she went. And so she got the nickname Little Red Riding Hood. One morning, her mother said, "Your grandmother is ill. Oh, it will do her good to see you. So take these cakes and this fresh bread to her house in the woods. Now take this basket and hurry, but be careful not to trip and hurt yourself." Off she went through the woods. Now in the woods there lived a big, bad wolf. And when he saw the flash of red of the cape, he knew it was the tender little girl. Red Riding Hood's mother had told her not to waste time, and her mother had taught her to be trusting. So when the wolf came up to her, she didn't know that he was bad.
"Good morning,"
said the wolf. "Good morning," said Red Riding Hood. The wolf asked,
"Where are you going?"
And she said, "To grandmother's house."
"What's in the basket?"
asked the wolf. And Red Riding Hood told him of the bread and cakes.
"It's such a beautiful day,"
said the wolf.
"Why don't you pick some flowers to take to your poor sick granny?"
What a wonderful idea, thought Red Riding Hood. And so, forgetting what her mother had said about not wasting time, and forgetting that her mother had also told her never to talk to strangers, Red Riding Hood started gathering flowers at the edge of the wood. Well, the wolf smacked his lips and thought about this tender morsel.
"If I'm lucky,"
he thought,
"I can gobble up Grandma, too."
The wolf ran through the woods to Granny's house and knocked on the door. "Who is it?" called Grandmother in a weak voice.
"It's Red Riding Hood. I mean..."
"It's Red Riding Hood,"
squeaked the wolf in his best little girl imitation. "Well, come in, dear," said Grandmother. And before she knew it, the wolf ran in. He leaped after Grandma. Round and round they ran, and before they stopped, the wolf opened his mouth and swallowed Grandma in one gulp. Then the wolf went to the closet. He put on a nightgown and a cap and climbed into the bed. Red Riding Hood came to the cabin and was very surprised to see the door open. She walked right in. Everything seemed dark and silent. She called, but no one answered. She went into the bedroom, and Grandmother seemed to be sleeping in the bed. "Why, Grandmother, what big ears you have!" cried Red Riding Hood.
"The better to hear you with, my dear," said the wolf.
"My, what big eyes you have," said Red Riding Hood.
"The better to see you with, my dear,"
said the wolf. But Grandmother, what big teeth you have."
"All the better to eat you with,"
growled the wolf. The wolf sprang out of bed and ran after poor little Red Riding Hood, and quick as a wink, he opened his mouth wide and swallowed Red Riding Hood right up. The wolf smiled, climbed back into bed, and soon was fast asleep. A woodsman passed by the cottage, and he heard the loud snoring. Why, there must be something wrong with Granny, he thought. I never heard her snore so loudly before. So he went into the house, and there, he saw the wolf asleep in the bed. He couldn't imagine what he was doing there, but he must have been up to no good. So he pulled out his hunting knife and slit the wolf wide open. And right out of the wolf's tummy hopped Red Riding Hood. And after that, out came Grandmother. Well, they thanked the woodsman for saving them from that big old wolf. And Red Riding Hood promised never to waste time or to ever talk to strangers again.
There once lived a very rich merchant who had 6 children, 3 girls and 3 boys, and he had spared nothing when it came to their education. Now the 3 daughters were all extremely pretty, but particularly the youngest, who was just so beautiful that as a child everyone had called her Beauty. As she grew, she remained equally as lovely, and so no one called her by any other name. And this made her sisters very jealous of her. Now it so happened that due to some unfortunate accident, the merchant suddenly lost all his wealth and was left with nothing but a small cottage in the country. He told his daughters they'd have to live in the cottage and they'd all have to work hard. The 2 eldest replied that they didn't know how to work, and anyway, they had lovers who would be glad to marry them. But they were mistaken, as no one wanted them. Beauty was the one they all felt sorry for, as she was so nice and kind to everyone. And while several gentlemen offered to marry her, she refused because she wouldn't leave her father while he was in trouble. Sometimes Beauty cried in secret for the hardship she now had to suffer, but she decided all the crying in the world wouldn't do any good. After shifting to the cottage, the merchant and his 3 sons worked in the fields and garden. Beauty rose at 4 in the morning, lit the fires, cleaned the house, and made breakfast for the whole family. At first she found it quite hard, but she soon grew used to it, and the work made her more beautiful than ever. She even found time to read, play, and sing while she spun. But her 2 sisters were quite lost. They had breakfast in bed and rose about 10 o'clock, went walking, and even that made them tired. They couldn't understand how Beauty could be so happy. After about a year, the merchant received news that one of his richest ships, which he had thought was lost, had come into port. So the merchant had to travel to his ship, but before he left, the 2 eldest daughters begged with him to bring them back new gowns, capes, and jewellery, while Beauty asked for nothing. Well, she had decided there wouldn't be enough money after everything her sisters wanted. However, rather than upset them, she did ask for a rose. His trip was worthless, and he started back home as poor as he had left it. On his way, he saw some fine roses, and as he plucked the prettiest one, a most frightful-looking beast rose up and asked why he dared touch these flowers. The beast spoke of killing him, but after the merchant explained that it was for one of his daughters, the beast decided the merchant could send one of them in his place, provided she came willingly. This decided, the beast then asked him into his palace for the night. As soon as the merchant arrived home, the daughters could see by his face that something was wrong, and on hearing the story, they blamed Beauty for their misfortune. So in spite of what her father and brothers said, Beauty was quite willing to go to the beast in her father's place. When they arrived at the palace doors, which were open, they heard music and walked into a room where supper was laid. After they had eaten, the Beast appeared, and after being told that Beauty had come willingly, he sent her father home. A special room had been set aside for Beauty, and she was treated well. One day, the Beast asked Beauty, "Am I so very ugly?" "Yes, indeed you are," she replied. "But you're so kind, I don't mind your looks." "Will you marry me then?" asked the Beast. And Beauty just said, "Please don't ask me." It was a beautiful palace, and Beauty discovered so many things as she went around it each day. She was, in fact, quite the queen of the palace, but very lonely. The Beast kept asking her to marry him, and she continued to shake her head, even though she liked him more and more. Having everything didn't make her happy, as she kept thinking of her father and brothers and sisters, so much so that one evening she asked the Beast if he'd let her go home. He agreed to let her go for 2 months, and he gave her a ring, telling her to place it on her dressing table whenever she desired to go or to return. He gave her clothes to wear and presents to take home. The poor Beast was sadder than ever, but Beauty promised to return soon. Going to her room that evening, she remembered to place the ring on the dressing table, and when she awoke the next morning, she found herself in her father's cottage. She rang a bell that was at her bedside, and a servant entered, but as soon as she saw Beauty, the woman gave a loud shriek, which brought the merchant dashing upstairs. He was so thrilled to see his daughter. Her 2 sisters were now married. At last Beauty remembered she had brought no clothes with her, but the servant told her she had found a large chest full of dresses all trimmed with gold in the other room. Beauty quietly thanked the Beast in her own mind and put on the plainest gown she could find. She asked the servant to put the rest aside, as she intended to give them to her sisters. As soon as she spoke those words, the chest had disappeared, and when her father suggested that the Beast chose for her to keep them, the chest reappeared in the same place. Next thing, their sisters and husbands came to visit. They both lived unhappily with the gentleman they had married. The husband of the eldest was very handsome, and he thought of nothing else but his pride. He certainly didn't care a pin for his wife's beauty. The second sister had married a most learned man, but he made no use of it, except to anger all his friends, and most of all, his wife. The 2 sisters couldn't bear it when they saw Beauty dressed like a princess. All of the kindness that she showed them was of no use, and they went by themselves into the garden and cried, just thinking about her good fortune. "Why should the little wretch be better off than we?" they said. "We're more beautiful than she is." The 2 spiteful sisters decided to try and keep Beauty at home for longer than she was meant to be, hoping that when she returned to the palace, the Beast would be so angry with her that he would eat her up. To do this, of course, meant they had to pretend to be very kind. When they returned to the cottage, the sisters showed her so much false love that Beauty was overjoyed. And when her 2 months was up, the sisters showed such grief and the thought of her leaving them that she agreed to stay 1 more week. All that time, Beauty couldn't help worrying about the Beast and how sad he would be with her continued absence. She realized that she loved him and missed his company. No one else she met was half so affectionate and kind. One night, she dreamt that the Beast was lying dead in his palace garden, and when she suddenly awoke, she burst into tears, thinking how wicked she was to behave so badly to the Beast when he had shown so much kindness. Quickly she rose and placed the ring on the dressing table, got back into bed and fell asleep again. In the morning she found herself back at the palace, and carefully she dressed herself that she might please the Beast. After looking for him in the palace, she remembered her dream, and running outside to the garden, she found him beside the fountain, apparently dead. Forgetting all his ugliness, she threw herself down beside him, and finding his heart still beating, she fetched some water, all the while weeping and crying. The Beast opened his eyes and said, "You broke your promise of only 2 months, and so I was determined to die. I can't live without you, but having seen your face once more, I can die happy." "Oh, no, dear Beast," cried Beauty. "You can't die. You must live to be my husband. All this time I thought we were only friends, but I love you." All at once the palace lit up, but Beauty didn't notice, for she had hung her head and was crying. When she looked up, the Beast was gone, and there stood a most handsome prince who thanked her for having freed him. But Beauty sobbed and wanted to know where her poor Beast was. It so happened a wicked fairy had changed the prince into a beast, and only a beautiful lady, happy to marry him in that form, could reverse the spell. Beauty was so happy, and back in the palace were her father and 2 sisters, brought there by the fairy lady. The 2 sisters were turned into statues to stand at the door of the palace until they had mended their faults of jealousy and unkind thoughts. "Beauty," said the fairy, "you have chosen well, and you have your reward, for a true heart is better than either good looks or clever brains." The merchant was delighted with his daughter's good fortune, and the prince was married to Beauty on the following day. Once upon a time there lived a prince whose one wish in life was to marry a princess, but she had to be a real princess. For a long time he travelled all over the world, looking and hoping to find such a lady. However, there was always something wrong. He managed to find plenty of princesses, but he found it impossible to decide as to whether they were real princesses or not. First one thing and then another seemed to him to be not quite right about them. Eventually he returned to his palace very depressed and upset because he so desperately wanted to have a real princess as his wife. One evening a most fearful storm blew up. It thundered, there was lightning, and the rain just poured down, and the night was pitch black. All at once there was a violent knocking on the door, and the old king, the prince's father, went to open it. Standing outside the door was a princess, and what with the rain and the wind, she looked a very sorry sight. The rain trickled down from her hair and over her face, and her clothes were just wringing wet as they clung to her body. She said she was a real princess. "Aha," thought the old Queen Mother, "we'll soon see about that." And she told no one about what she was going to do. Quietly she went into the bedroom where the princess was going to spend the night. She took off the bedclothes and placed a pea on the very bottom of the bed. After that, she then laid 20 feather mattresses, one on top of the other, and finally put 20 eiderdowns over the mattresses. The next morning they asked the princess how she had slept. "Oh, very badly, I'm afraid," she replied. "I hardly closed my eyes or slept a wink the whole night. To be sure, I don't know just what was in my bed, but there was something very hard under me, and I'm black and blue all over. It did hurt me so very much." Now it was obvious that the young lady must definitely be a real princess, because she'd been able to feel that one pea through 20 feather mattresses and 20 eiderdowns. No one but a real princess could have had such an extremely delicate sense of feeling. So at long last the prince was happy, and he married the princess. As for the pea, well, it was placed in a glass cabinet, where it can still be seen. That is, unless someone has carried it off.